Nicolas Cage is the kind of figure Hollywood never quite knew whether to celebrate or erase. He could leave audiences breathless in Leaving Las Vegas, explode into extremes in Face Off, then step into national treasure as if no boundary had ever existed between genius and madness. He doesn't perform by the rules. He breaks them. And for a long time, Hollywood praised that wildness as a rare form of genius. But the truth behind the spotlight is far more unsettling than many imagine. While Nicolas Cage continued to appear on screen with his familiar smile, his private life was in free fall. Failed marriages left not just wounds, but a lingering emptiness. Financial decisions spiraled beyond control, turning fame into a burden. And then came the most bitter moment of all, when Hollywood stopped laughing with him and began laughing at him. From a daring icon, Nicolas Cage was gradually turned into a joke. His name appeared more often in mocking videos than in serious discussions about acting. And while the public believed he had lost himself, he was forced to accept any role that came along, not to stay famous, but simply to survive. Yet this story does not end in collapse, because just as the world became convinced that Nicolas Cage was a relic, a legend out of time, an unspoken turning point occurred, powerful enough to make those who had turned away look back, not through apologies, not through spectacle, but through the very thing they had once denied in him. So in the end, is Nicolas Cage a misunderstood genius? Or a man who pushed himself to the edge, then struggled to turn back in desperation? Between genius and punchline, where do you place Nicolas Cage? Before becoming Hollywood's Nicolas Cage, the man synonymous with extreme choices and emotions that refuse to be restrained, he grew up in a world where instability was the most familiar constant. Nicholas Kim Coppola was born on January 7, 1964, in Long Beach, California, the youngest of three brothers. He came from a family where intellect and art ran deep across generations, yet stability was always fragile. His paternal grandparents were Carmine Coppola, a composer, and Italia Pennino, an actress. Through his father, Nicholas was the nephew of director Francis Ford Coppola and actress Talia Shire, and a cousin to directors Roman Coppola and Sofia Coppola, the late film producer Giancarlo Coppola, and actors Robert Carmine and Jason Schwartzman. His two brothers are Christopher Coppola and Mark Coppola. From the outside, it looked like a starting point many could only dream of. But inside that home, a sense of safety was never guaranteed. His father, August Floyd Coppola, was a literature professor, calm, disciplined, living by reason and words. His mother, Joy Vogelsang, was a dancer and choreographer, passionate, creative, but fragile. These two worlds constantly collided, intellect and emotion, control and eruption. For a child, there was no need to understand the reasons. Living in that atmosphere alone was enough to learn caution. Their house carried the scent of old books, coffee, and perfume. Beautiful, layered, but unpredictable. There were warm days, and there were days of silence so heavy they felt frightening. Nicola would later remember very little about specific arguments. What stayed with him more vividly was what followed. The prolonged quiet, closed doors, evenings without explanation, and the persistent feeling that something was always out of sync. When Nicholas was 12, that delicate balance finally broke. His parents divorced. He lived with his father, who loved his children through order and discipline. His mother remained a beloved presence, but an unstable one, frequently hospitalized, sometimes disappearing for months at a time. For Nicholas, this created a familiar yet dangerous lesson. Love could vanish at any moment. It was during these years that Nicholas learned to hide fear behind composure. He spoke less, observed more, and gradually understood that emotions, if left unchecked, could cause everything to collapse. It wasn't early maturity, it was a survival mechanism. At Beverly Hills High School, a different kind of pressure emerged. The Coppola name was not just an honor, it was a shadow. Nicolas studied alongside people who would later become well-known artists, such as Albert Brooks, Angelina Jolie, Lenny Kravitz, Slash, Rob Reiner, Richard Dreyfuss, Bonnie Franklin, and David Schwimmer. But for Nicolas, what drew the most attention wasn't his personality. It was the family behind him. Whispers followed him that his future had already been arranged, that any success would never truly be his own. Nicolas didn't respond by rejecting his lineage outright. Instead, he tried to separate himself from it. At first, he experimented with another name, Roy Richards, as a temporary shield. But then he went further. He began using the surname Cage, a deliberate choice meant to sever the connection to his famous uncle and the expectations attached to the Coppola name. The new name was inspired by avant-garde composer John Cage and Marvel character Luke Cage, symbols of freedom and resilience. This was not an impulsive act of rebellion, it was a declaration. He wanted to be judged on his own terms. Alongside this process of self-definition, acting emerged as an escape. Nicolas developed an early ambition to become an actor and enrolled at UCLA's School of Theater, Film, and Television. His first acting experience wasn't on a film set, but in a school play titled Golden Boy. There, he realized that acting wasn't merely a profession, it was a place where emotions were allowed to exist without apology. His early idols were James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause and Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon, men who transformed raw emotion into strength. By the age of 15, Nicolas began to believe that the very things that had fractured his family, fear, instability, unrestrained emotion, could also become fuel for art. That childhood did not create a stable Nicolas Cage. It created a Nicolas Cage who would always go to emotional extremes, who never trusted lasting safety, and who desperately wanted to be seen as an individual. When he later stepped into the spotlight carrying characters full of tension and extremity, he didn't learn them in acting school. He had lived with them from a very early age. The silence of Nicolas Cage's childhood did not disappear when he left his family. It simply changed shape. When he arrived in Los Angeles in the early 1980s, Nicolas carried with him a familiar sensation, being left behind. The city glowed outside the window, neon lights, music, laughter. But to him, it felt like a world not meant for him. Years later, he would say that he carried that silence throughout his early life, not as sadness, but as a void that needed to be filled with action. At 17, Nicolas stepped out from the protective circle of his family. With the Coppola name no longer serving as a shield, he chose the uncertainty of survival. He left Beverly Hills High School before graduating, but he did not abandon formal training. Instead, he continued studying acting, devoting most of his time to stage practice, script reading, and auditions. For him, education was not a ticket to fame. It was the only way to prove that he had not been pre-selected. He moved from one cheap rental apartment to another. There were nights when he slept on the floor, moments when he sat in his car with the engine running just to fight the cold. He took whatever jobs he could, sweeping stages, running errands backstage, anything that allowed him to remain in the city one more day. Some nights he practiced lines alone in a dark room, speaking softly into the emptiness just to hear his own voice, not to impress anyone, but to remind himself that he still existed. "I wanted to be seen for who I really was," he once said, "not because of my last name." In Hollywood at that time, He was just another anonymous face among thousands of dreamers, a place where hope was a fragile currency and despair was the monthly price of staying. To survive, Nicholas sold popcorn at the Fairfax Theater. He stood behind the counter, watching other faces appear on the screen, people living the dream he had yet to touch. The smell of butter and burnt sugar clung to his jacket, reminding him that he was feeding someone else's dream, while his own still had no shape. His first small role came in The Best of Times. It arrived quietly and disappeared just as fast. Then came Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Nicholas sat in the theater, waiting for his moment. But when the film ended, he realized his scene had been cut entirely. The screen went dark. And in that moment, so did the dream. Years later, he recalled, "I thought maybe this dream wasn't meant for me." But for Nicolas Cage, pain was not an ending. It became discipline. He auditioned relentlessly, trained with even greater severity, turning every rejection into a ritual of self-forging. When his uncle Francis Ford Coppola offered him a role in Rumble Fish, Nicholas agreed on one condition. He wanted to be judged as an actor, not as a favored nephew. The real turning point came shortly afterward with Valley Girl. In the role of Randy, Nicolas Cage revealed for the first time that he was not just a jagged or unstable presence. He could also be gentle, romantic, and emotionally accessible. The film was released before Rumble Fish and earned him critical goodwill, opening doors that had previously been out of reach. In the years that followed, Nicolas Cage threw himself into acting with a level of extremity that baffled Hollywood. One of the earliest signs that he was willing to exceed every expectation was Birdie, a psychological teen war film set in Philadelphia in the mid-1960s. The Boys story follows the friendship between Birdie, Matthew Modine, and Al Columbato. Two boys who love birds, love the sky, grow up in unstable homes, and are then thrust into the Vietnam War, where innocence has no chance of returning. In its first half, Birdie feels like a gentle coming-of-age tale, almost fairy tale-like. Small adventures, dreams of flight, and a naive but enduring friendship. Nicolas Cage's Al appears awkward, fervent, and full of goodwill that has yet to find its place in the world. That likability makes the films turn all the more painful when the two return from war. No combat scenes, no heroism, only psychological trauma and long stretches of silence. As Birdie slips into dissociation, Al is the one who remains, desperately watching his friend survive but no longer be present. Cage does not express pain through explosive outbursts, but through helplessness. Angry eyes, a harsh voice, and the hollow grief of facing someone who has become only a shadow of the past. The role demanded that Cage hold two opposing states at once, the wildness of youth and the emptiness after war, a risky challenge for any young actor. To prepare for the role of Al Columbato, Nicolas Cage lost roughly 15 pounds and had 2 front teeth pulled without anesthesia. No one asked him to. No one encouraged it. He did it because he believed that if the body did not truly experience loss, the emotion on screen would be false. Later, Cage admitted that he was terrified of playing Al, afraid he was not capable of reaching the emotional depths the character required. And that fear was precisely why he forced himself to pay a price before the character did. Birdie was not a box office success, but Cage's performance led the film to be reappraised as an underrated classic and laid the foundation for his reputation as an actor willing to take risks, even when his career offered no guarantees. That extremity did not stop there. In Racing with the Moon, he lived alone in a cold trailer, eating canned soup, deliberately isolating himself from comfort. And while working on the Cotton Club, He once destroyed a remote-controlled car belonging to a street vendor to provoke the anger he needed for a scene. A small act, but enough for the crew to understand that he had no concept of playing it safe. Filmmakers called him crazy. Nicolas called it honesty. "I'm not chasing fame," he said. "I'm chasing truth." During this same period, in 1984, Nicolas Cage lived on the 6th floor of the Fontenoy Tower apartment building, and his neighbor was Johnny Depp. At the time, Depp was not an actor. He was the guitarist for the band Rock City Angels, struggling with money and direction, two young men on the same floor, sharing the same uncertainty, often talking in worn hallways. It was Nicolas Cage who, through repeated encouragement and introductions to his own agent, helped push Depp to consider leaving the band and trying acting. It was not a legendary moment, just two men looking for an exit, and one of them seeing a door for the other. Gradually, Hollywood began to take notice, not because Nicolas Cage was easy to understand, but because he could not be ignored. The young man who once swept stages now stood under the lights, not by luck, but by erosion, humiliation, hunger, sleepless nights. Everything became fuel. The silence that had haunted him finally found a voice, speaking through each role. Fame would come later. But the fire was already there, born not from success, but from years of rejection. And that fire, fed by pain and discipline, shaped a Nicolas Cage the world had never seen. Until now. Sometimes the universe doesn't applaud the moment you try. It waits. And when it finally does applaud, the sound crashes like thunder, making all the years before it suddenly feel meaningful. For Nicolas Cage, that moment came in 1987 when Moonstruck was released. Acting opposite Cher, his wild yet tightly controlled energy turned what could have been a gentle love story into something sharp and unforgettable. It was the first time the public didn't just see Nicolas Cage, they truly recognized him. But fame, Cage soon realized, doesn't only bring warmth, it also begins to burn. The lights, the laughter, the packed interview schedules all arrived at once. And in the middle of that wave, something familiar quietly disappeared. The stillness that had once protected him during his years of anonymity. That first success didn't slow Nicolas Cage down. It only pushed him further and made him more reckless. In 1990, Wild at Heart arrived like a storm. Cage's performance, both chaotic and tender, helped the film win the Palme d'Or at Cannes, cementing his image as an actor willing to cross safe boundaries. Critics argued, audiences were swept along, and Cage increasingly believed that madness, when controlled, could become a form of truth in acting. But the higher he climbed, the thinner the air became. And by 1995, the cost of that commitment was impossible to ignore. Leaving Las Vegas was not simply a role. It was an erosion. Cage became a man spiraling toward self-destruction so completely that the line between acting and self-exposure nearly disappeared. When the Oscar was awarded, the room erupted in applause and camera flashes. But for Cage, the moment didn't feel like pure victory. It felt like a bell ringing at the summit, signaling that he had reached a new limit, not only in his career, but within himself. From art, Nicolas Cage stepped straight into the heart of Hollywood's commercial machine. The Rock, Con Air, Face Off. In just a few short years, he became a global box office guarantee. The young man who once slept in his car was now earning $20 million per film. His name echoed from Los Angeles to Tokyo. The numbers were staggering, but so was the pace. Cage filmed almost without pause, work days stretching endlessly, relentless action sequences, sleepless nights memorizing lines under the flickering lights of a vibrating trailer. There were evenings when he left the set completely drained, murmuring dialogue to his own reflection, just to be sure he was still connected to himself. He was everywhere. But the feeling of truly being present became increasingly rare. The camera elevated him, but the man behind it slowly began to fade, piece by piece. Nicolas Cage's fame remained at its peak, but stability did not. City of Angels revealed a different Cage. Quiet, gentle, playing an angel who gives up eternity to live as a human. The film touched millions, but for Cage, it reflected a growing loneliness, a man who had everything, yet still lacked something he couldn't name. Alongside success came cracks. Snake Eyes failed to meet expectations. Captain Corelli's Mandolin collapsed financially. Each silent box office left an uncomfortable echo. Not because of money, but because of the feeling of being left behind at the very height of his ascent. Then, National Treasure arrived in 2004, pulling Cage back into top-tier mainstream stardom with a global box office of $347 million and an estimated net worth of around $150 million. From a teenage popcorn seller to a face-filling theaters worldwide, it was a rare journey. But beneath the blazing lights, the silence returned. Awards no longer eased the exhaustion. Victories no longer filled the void. In hotel rooms at 3 in the morning with city lights blinking beyond the window, Cage saw both the legend and the boy who once dreamed, coexisting and neither fully at rest. Even the brightest fire leaves ash behind. No collapse happens in a single moment. It is the result of choices repeated long enough that turning back becomes impossible. By 2009, Nicolas Cage officially found himself in serious trouble with the U.S. Internal Revenue Service. The IRS declared that he owed $6.2 million in unpaid federal taxes for 2007. When penalties, interest, and previous obligations were added, the total rose to roughly $14 million. This was not a minor mistake. It was proof of a financial system that had long been out of control. For years, Cage lived as if success were permanent. He plunged into real estate with the same intensity he once brought to acting. 15 properties were purchased in a short period of time. Lavish estates in New Orleans, a castle in Europe, a private island in the Bahamas, and properties chosen more for symbolism than practicality. The list reflected not just wealth, but a mindset of accumulation and self-assertion. The belief that there would always be a next film to make up the difference. The extravagance didn't stop at real estate. Cage spent heavily on unusual collectibles, antiquities, rare artifacts, even items later forced to be returned due to legal complications. This was not a series of isolated indulgences, but a pattern of consumption without restraint, where money was no longer managed, only used to soothe insecurity. The real problem was not what he bought, but that no one controlled the overall picture. When the IRS stepped in, everything was exposed. Cage blamed his financial manager, accusing negligence and fraud, and filed lawsuits seeking tens of millions in damages. The manager responded that Cage had ignored repeated warnings and continued spending far beyond his actual liquidity. This was no longer a question of right or wrong. It was a system that had collapsed, pulling everyone inside it down. The consequences came quickly and without mercy. Properties that once defined Cage's lifestyle were put up for sale. Homes were seized, estates auctioned. Objects once bought as symbols of power became tools for repayment. There was no glamour left, only contraction. Cage was forced to sell the very things that had defined his image of limitlessness, not to reinvest, but to survive. For the first time, cinematic life and real life collided head-on. No role to hide in, no script to redo the scene. Taxes, the thing Cage once ignored amid million-dollar contracts, finally dragged him back to the ground. Not as moral punishment, but as cold reality. No one is exempt, not even Nicolas Cage. When fame could no longer protect him, Nicolas Cage was forced back to the starting point, not in glory, but in silence. The media called it the fall of a Hollywood king. Cage did not argue. He also refused the familiar route of declaring bankruptcy to close the chapter. Instead, he accepted responsibility and found his own way forward. What assets remained were sold, not to preserve an image, but to pay debts and continue living. Hollywood turned away quickly. The phone rang less. Big scripts stopped coming. But Cage did not disappear. He did the simplest and hardest thing. He kept working. But there is a bitter irony at the heart of it all. The man who conquered the world on screen repeatedly lost the most private battles of his own life. Not because he was cruel, but because he loved too quickly, too intensely, and always at the wrong moment. Young love, Christina Fulton. They met in 1988 when Nicolas Cage was just entering the orbit of light, his name beginning to appear on posters, his face growing familiar to audiences, and the Hollywood dream finally taking shape. Christina, a former elite model management model and a young actress finding her own way through a ruthless industry, entered his life not as an icon, but as a real person, quiet enough not to be swept away by the spotlight, strong enough to stand beside a rising star. They were together for only 2 years, but the relationship was intense. They appeared side by side at film premieres, charity events, and late nights before Hollywood had fully consumed them. Christina later said that Cage protected and guided her during her early days in Los Angeles, not through status or fame, but through the vigilance of someone who understood the city's darker side. But there is a bitter irony at the heart of it all. The man who conquered the world on screen repeatedly lost the most private battles of his own life. Not because he was cruel, but because he loved too quickly, too intensely, and always at the wrong moment. Young love, Christina Fulton. They met in 1988 when Nicolas Cage was just entering the orbit of light, his name beginning to appear on posters, his face growing familiar to audiences, and the Hollywood dream finally taking shape. Christina, a former elite model management model and a young actress finding her own way through a ruthless industry, entered his life not as an icon, but as a real person, quiet enough not to be swept away by the spotlight, strong enough to stand beside a rising star. They were together for only 2 years, but the relationship was intense. They appeared side by side at film premieres, charity events, and late nights before Hollywood had fully consumed them. Christina later said that Cage protected and guided her during her early days in Los Angeles, not through status or fame, but through the vigilance of someone who understood the city's darker side. In December 1990, their son, Weston Coppola Cage, was born. For Nicolas, it was one of the rare moments when the world seemed to stop spinning, but it was also the moment when the cracks began to show. Fame pulled him farther away, faster than ever. Christina stayed behind, becoming a mother. Nicolas continued building other worlds on film sets. They separated not long afterward, without drama, without bitterness, simply 2 young people exhausted by responsibilities they had not yet learned how to protect. Years passed, and the relationship seemed to fade into the past, but some stories never truly end. They only change shape. In 2009, Christina Fulton filed a lawsuit against Nicolas Cage related to assets she claimed he had promised her and their son. The case was later settled, quietly closed, much like the way they had parted. But in 2025, the past resurfaced in a far more painful form. Christina Fulton filed a second lawsuit, this time not only against Nicolas Cage, but also against their son, following a serious incident in 2024 in which Weston was accused of assaulting his mother. In the filing, Christina alleged that Cage had ignored his son's long-standing mental health issues, enabled dangerous behavior, and failed to intervene in time. Through his legal representatives, Cage denied all allegations, stating that he does not control the actions of an adult man and bears no responsibility for what occurred. The legal truth will be determined by the courts, but on a human level, the wound is undeniable. 35 years after they first met, a relationship that began with youthful hope has become a chain of aftershocks, where love, parenthood, fame, and responsibility collide in ways no one intended. Christina Fulton is not only Nicolas Cage's most painful early love, she is the woman tied to the opening chapter of his life and the reminder that some choices from the past never fully disappear. Because love can end, but its consequences do not. In the early 1990s, as Hollywood began to truly bow to Nicolas Cage, his personal life entered a different rhythm. His name appeared everywhere, shooting schedules overlapped, and roles followed one another at a pace that allowed no pause. It was during this period that he met Kristen Zhang, a young model, composed and grounded, untouched by the fame and glare surrounding him. Kristen did not see Cage as a rising Hollywood symbol. She noticed the man behind the roles, someone who still enjoyed driving along Mulholland Drive at sunset, who stopped to pet stray dogs on set, and who longed for quiet, but had never learned how to hold on to it for long. With her, Cage did not need to chase anything. For one of the few times in years, he felt at home. Their relationship carried the shape of a fragile balance. Cage was impulsive, extreme. Kristen was calm, measured. That contrast created a narrow space of harmony. Dinners without media attention, long nights ending in conversation rather than headlines. It was a beautiful love, but one that carried the mark of impermanence from the beginning. When he proposed, Cage was still Cage, decisive and emotionally unguarded. In a brightly lit restaurant before silent onlookers, he knelt and spoke without theatrics. Kristen said yes. In that moment, everything seemed to slow, as if Hollywood itself had briefly stopped, watching. But just weeks before the wedding, the past returned. Cage reconnected with Patricia Arquette, the woman he had pursued for nearly a decade. Unresolved emotions resurfaced, and the calm he had built with Kristen began to fracture. Kristen sensed it not through words, but through his eyes. She withdrew quietly, leaving the ring behind as a conclusion that needed no argument. They did not turn the relationship into a public wound. There was no blame, no bitterness, just a departure made in time, before things could become worse. Years later, when Cage spoke of Kristen, he did not do so with regret or tragedy. He simply acknowledged that it was peace he once had, but did not have the capacity to keep. Kristen Zhang, therefore, was not the great love of Nicolas Cage's life. She was the final pause, brief, necessary, and impossible to repeat, before he entered the next relationship, one that would no longer be about calm, but about fire. People often say that every man has one story that defines him, a love intense enough to follow him for the rest of his life, even after it no longer exists. For Nicolas Cage, that story bears the name Patricia Arquette. In the late 1980s, they met in a moment that felt almost cinematic at Cantor's Deli in Los Angeles. Patricia was only 19 at the time. Cage was 5 years older, already beginning to draw attention, yet still carrying the air of a wild man not yet contained. That same evening, both Cage and Crispin Glover told Patricia they would marry her. But only Cage treated those words as a vow. He asked Patricia to write him a list, not of gifts, but of tasks, to prove that he was worthy. The list was nearly impossible. A signature from J.D. Salinger, a black orchid that did not exist, traditional wedding clothing from the Lisu tribe, and a statue of Bob's big boy. Patricia believed it was a graceful way of saying no. Cage did not. One by one, he found ways to bring them to her. When the black orchid proved impossible, he appeared with a purple orchid and a can of spray paint. When the signature was unattainable, he purchased a rare Salinger letter for thousands of dollars. Each delivery ended the same way. Cage placed the item down and left, without waiting for thanks. That extremity, both romantic and unsettling, made Patricia recoil. She called him and asked him to stop. They broke up. In the years that followed, their lives moved in different directions. Cage had a son, Weston, with Christina Fulton. Patricia had a son, Enzo, with Paul Rossi. The encounter seemed destined to remain a strange memory of youth. Then, in 1995, they met again, also in Los Angeles. This time, the roles were reversed. Patricia was the one who initiated. She appeared at Cage's home dressed in black vinyl, holding a purple wedding cake, and proposed to him. Cage, who had once pursued her through impossible trials, stopped long enough to realize that he had never truly forgotten her. 2 weeks later, they married on a cliff in Carmel, California. The ceremony was nearly audience-free, attended only by a former local sheriff and, according to legend, a group of sea otters. It was not a Hollywood wedding. It felt more like a belated vow. Their marriage afterward was constantly surrounded by rumors, separations, reconciliations, divorce filings followed by withdrawals. But years later, Patricia insisted that reality was far more complex than the headlines suggested. There were periods when they did not live together because of arguments, work obligations, her need to care for her mother as she was dying of cancer, or Cage filming far from home. Not an immediate collapse, but prolonged distances layered on top of one another. By 2001, after years of uncertainty, they officially divorced, citing irreconcilable differences. No scandal, no accusations, just two people acknowledging that their love could no longer exist in its original form. Patricia said it was a painful but necessary decision. Cage later admitted that they had gone a very long time without speaking. Looking back, the relationship between Cage and Arquette was not an explosive tragedy, but a prolonged story of obsession, reunion, and exhaustion. It revealed a Nicolas Cage very different from his public image, a man who loved without knowing where to stop, who chased emotion as if it were the final role of his life, and often only recognized the cost once everything had gone quiet. For that reason, Patricia Arquette was not merely a marriage in Cage's life. She was the earliest proof of a paradox that would repeat itself many times afterward. The more he longed for attachment, the harder it became for him to hold on to it. Not long after his marriage to Patricia Arquette ended, Nicolas Cage entered another relationship that carried the weight of myth from the very beginning. This time, the woman in his life was Lisa Marie Presley, the only daughter of Elvis Presley. But to Cage, she was not a cultural icon or a musical legacy. She was a person marked by the particular loneliness of those born under an overwhelming spotlight. They met in October 2000 at Johnny Ramone's 52nd birthday party. At the time, Cage was still finalizing his divorce from Patricia Arquette, while Lisa Marie was engaged to musician John Ozaika. The meeting was unplanned, yet deeply affecting. Cage later said that he did not see Elvis's daughter but a woman with sad eyes and rare directness, someone who seemed to carry too many stories that had never been truly heard. Both understood the pressure of growing up beneath enormous names. Cage was the nephew of Francis Ford Coppola. Lisa Marie was the daughter of the king of rock and roll. That shared experience created an immediate sense of recognition, as if they saw themselves reflected in one another. Their relationship quickly attracted media attention, even as both tried to avoid turning it into a public spectacle. During their engagement, signs of instability were already visible. On a boating trip, Lisa Marie's 6-carat yellow diamond engagement ring, valued at approximately $65,000, was thrown into the sea after an argument. Divers were hired to search for it, but the ring was never recovered. Lisa Marie later said that Cage replaced it just days later with an even larger ring. But the story of the ring sinking into the ocean quickly became a symbol of their volatile relationship. Despite these fractures, they moved forward with marriage. On August 10, 2002, Nicolas Cage and Lisa Marie Presley were married in a private ceremony in Hawaii, held during the week marking the 25th anniversary of Elvis Presley's death. The wedding came quickly, as both were caught in a familiar cycle, breaking up, reconciling, and trying once more to believe that this time would be different. But less than 4 months later, in November 2002, Cage filed for divorce. The marriage lasted only 109 days. Lisa Marie publicly called it a big mistake, admitting that they should never have married in the first place. Cage, in rare comments, acknowledged that when two people are both strong-willed and intense, living together can become impossible, even when the feelings are real. After the divorce, Lisa Marie described the relationship as a dramatic nightmare where every emotion was pushed to extremes. When it was good, it was dazzling. When it was bad, it was unbearable. Yet notably, they did not become enemies. Instead, they gradually maintained a friendship, acknowledging a connection that was difficult to explain. Like two people sharing the same nomadic rhythm, the same tendency toward emotional self-destruction. Years later, Cage looked back on the relationship with greater calm. He said that at its core, it was not about tragedy or spectacle, but about humor and deeply human moments, things often overshadowed by the enormous legacy of Elvis Presley. When Lisa Marie passed away in 2023, Cage was one of the few former husbands to speak publicly, remembering her laughter and the pain she endured, especially after the death of her son Benjamin. For Nicolas Cage, that brief marriage was not merely a romantic failure, it was proof of a stage in his life when he still believed intensity could replace stability. That overwhelming emotion was the same as destiny. Lisa Marie Presley did not destroy him, but the relationship forced him to confront his own limits more clearly. That two people carrying darkness are not always capable of lighting the way for one another. Less than 2 years after the ring disappeared beneath the river, Nicolas Cage did not actively seek out a new relationship. Not because he had healed, but because a series of losses had made him more cautious with his own emotions. And then love arrived in the simplest way possible. No red carpet, no headlines, no drama. They met at a small sushi restaurant in Los Angeles. At the time, Cage was already in his 40s, weary of fame and known for being unpredictable. She was Alice Kim, 20 years old, a young waitress with a calm gaze and a manner of speaking, untouched by the presence of a Hollywood star. There was no inflated moment of destiny, just a man ordering food and a woman smiling in response. Yet it was precisely that ordinariness that made the difference. Cage later said she appeared at a time when he no longer needed passion or intensity, only peace. The relationship moved quickly, surprising them both. By the end of 2004, they married, despite whispers about the age gap and skeptical looks from the outside. For Cage, this was not a headline-grabbing adventure, but a decision rooted in survival. Alice pulled him away from the spiral of extremity that had followed him for years. Their life narrowed. Meals at home, long drives without destinations, evenings without cameras. In 2005, their son was born. Cage named him Kal-El, Superman's birth name, as a symbol of hope and rebirth. Friends remarked that he had never seemed so calm. The man who once lived amid extravagance now adjusted to a very different rhythm. Quiet mornings, small routines, a life with structure. Someone close to him once said Alice was the first person who made him feel safe without having to perform. Then harsh reality arrived. Hollywood shifted, and fortune turned away. Past financial decisions spiraled into tax burdens and debt. The empire collapsed. Properties were sold one by one, and his public image became distorted in the media. But during that period, Alice did not leave. When public opinion mocked him, she stood beside him. When headlines screamed, she chose silence. They raised their son away from the cameras, slowly rebuilding a simpler life. Cage later admitted that without her, he might have lost himself completely. For a man accustomed to extremes, Alice brought balance. For someone surrounded by noise, she brought silence. And gradually that calm took the shape of habit. No betrayal, no major conflict. Only the natural distance that forms when two people grow at different rhythms. In 2016, they quietly separated. No scandal, no accusations. Cage later said Alice remained his closest friend, and that they simply no longer walked in the same direction. Years later, he still speaks of her with respect. Not as a failed marriage, but as a relationship that fulfilled its purpose. When asked what that love meant to him, he answered simply, "She arrived when he needed peace the most, and left when he was strong enough to hold on to it himself." Perhaps not every love story is meant to last forever. Some exist only to hold you steady when you are about to fall, to remind you that amid a noisy life, love can begin with a quiet meal in a small sushi restaurant and end with gratitude for someone who stayed when the rest of the world turned away. By 2020, at the age of 56, Nicolas Cage entered a very different phase of life. He had experienced nearly every state a Hollywood star could endure: extreme success, financial collapse, intense relationships, and years of constant pressure. At that point, Cage was no longer searching for novelty or drama. What he lacked was stability. Cage met Rico Shibata during a trip to Japan while visiting a small art gallery. The meeting was unplanned. Shibata was 26 at the time, soft-spoken, private, and outside the entertainment industry. They began talking, then stayed in touch. The relationship formed slowly, without media attachment or the constant public exposure that had marked Cage's earlier romances. The greatest difference lay in how they lived together. There were no cycles of breakups and reconciliations, no public arguments, no image-driven pressure. Cage later acknowledged that Shibata did not try to change him, nor was she pulled into his complicated past. That allowed the relationship to feel lighter. In February 2021, they married at the Wynn Hotel in Las Vegas in a small ceremony. Cage chose a wedding date that coincided with the birthday of his late father, August Coppola. The decision was personal, not symbolic for the public. The ceremony was understated, attended only by close family and friends. After marriage, Cage did not alter his life to perform the role of a new husband. Instead, he scaled back public activity, appeared less at events, and spent more time at home. In 2022, their daughter was born and named August Francesca. This was the first time Cage became a father near the age of 60, and he admitted the experience felt entirely different from before. Those close to him say Cage became more patient, less impulsive. His family life revolved around ordinary routines: caring for his child, eating dinner at home, limiting unnecessary travel. He continued acting, but no longer accepted projects at any cost as he had during the financial crisis years. Notably, Cage speaks very little about this marriage in the media. There are no grand declarations, no stories repeated again and again. When asked, he answers briefly, focusing on the present rather than emotion. After decades of living in extremes in both work and personal life, Nicolas Cage entered the most stable period of his life. Not because problems disappeared, but because he stopped trying to fill his life with noise. If earlier relationships were tied to fame, passion, and pressure, then his marriage to Rico Shibata represents something else. The ability to stay, to accept a slower rhythm, and to no longer need to prove anything. It is not a dramatic ending, but for Nicolas Cage, perhaps it is the first time he has not needed one. Looking back at Nicolas Cage's relationships as a whole, a recurring pattern emerges. He does not love to possess, nor does he love to stabilize. He loves to search for a different version of himself at each stage of life. Each woman who entered his life arrived at a moment when he lacked something: emotion, order, salvation, or peace. And when that need changed, the relationship ended. Not in hatred, but in exhaustion. Cage is not a man who failed at love. He is a man who lived love as a process of constant experimentation, intense, unsafe, and costly. Only when he stopped searching for meaning in others did relationships cease to become battlefields. And those emotional cycles, more than any award, quietly shaped the artist Nicolas Cage, the complex legacy he carries as he moves into the next chapter, influence, and the mark he leaves on film history. Nicolas Cage's greatest legacy does not lie in titles or box office numbers, but in his willingness to break himself open in front of the camera. Cage does not act to be liked. He acts to reach the furthest edge of a state of being, even when that makes him appear excessive, violent, or far outside Hollywood norms. For Cage, acting is an act of throwing himself into risk. He screams, trembles, howls, laughs grotesquely, disrupts the rhythm of a scene, not to shock, but because he believes real emotion is never tidy. What others avoid out of fear of damaging their image, Cage treats as territory that must be entered. His influence did not create a school to be copied, but a new threshold for courage in acting. After Nicolas Cage, the question is no longer, is this role flattering, but rather, how much of themselves did the actor dare to sacrifice for it? At that point, Cage has no successor, only those forced to confront his shadow. Now, at the age of 61, Nicolas Cage is living a life entirely different from the world that once surrounded his name. Gone are the years when a single signature could command millions of dollars. Gone are the private jets and ostentatious symbols once mistaken for success. Cage's present life is far quieter. And that quiet is a deliberate choice, not a retreat. He wakes up in Malibu not to camera lenses, but to the sound of the Pacific Ocean and the daily rhythms of family life. For someone who has endured multiple cycles of ascent and collapse in a ruthless industry, this silence does not signify retirement. It is a state of stability he paid a long price to earn. After losing nearly his entire estimated net worth of around $150 million during the 2008 financial crisis, Cage did not choose bankruptcy, an entirely legal path in Hollywood. Instead, he worked continuously, taking on multiple projects each year, prioritizing repayment over reputation. For nearly a decade, he appeared constantly on screen, not out of ambition, but out of responsibility. By 2017, he had fully paid off all outstanding debts. "I put myself in that situation," he once said, So, I had to get myself out of it. Cage's current net worth is estimated at around $25 million. Not remarkable by Hollywood standards, but the result of a slow, deliberate rebuilding. He lives in a beachfront home in Malibu, designed not for display, but for living. He also keeps a house in Las Vegas, a remnant of a period when he believed everything had to be big to matter. But most of the time, Cage chooses a simpler rhythm: family, work, and a small, stable circle. He still retains an interest in machinery and classic cars, but his collection has been reduced. A few remaining vehicles, such as a 1963 Corvette, a Ferrari Enzo, or a Lamborghini Miura, are kept as mementos, not symbols. The controversial collectibles of his past are gone. I realized objects have weight, he told GQ. And if you're not careful, they can pull you under. Today, he wears a simple watch, a wedding ring, and no longer feels the need to prove anything to the world. To the public, Nicolas Cage's current life may appear modest, but to him, it represents something rare, a life quiet enough to continue working, not to escape the past, but to live alongside it. Nicolas Cage is not a story that invites easy consensus. To some audiences, he embodies unpredictability, baffling choices, and a career marked by erratic highs and lows. To others, Cage is a rare example of an artist willing to pay the price to remain faithful to creative instinct, even when that price is fame, money, or ridicule. He did not choose the safe path. He did not choose a stable image. He did not choose to be easily liked. Cage accepted being wrong, excessive, and different in exchange for not becoming a copy of himself. And in Hollywood, that is a more extreme choice than any role he has ever played. Perhaps that is why Nicolas Cage continues to divide opinion. Is he a misunderstood genius or simply an actor too deeply immersed in instinct? Is he breaking the boundaries of acting, or merely ignoring them? Where do you stand? Leave a comment below, even if your view runs against the majority. And if you find these stories behind the spotlight worth reflecting on, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can continue this journey with us, where fame is stripped away and the human being is what remains.